A deputy superintendent of police has taken his own life in what authorities are calling a shocking turn of events that has left the Nigerian law enforcement community reeling. The senior officer, whose identity has been confirmed as DSP Adekunle Adebayo, was found deceased from a self-inflicted gunshot wound at his residence in Abuja just as investigators were closing in on him over allegations that he had been supplying weapons to armed bandits, terrorizing communities across the northwestern region of the country. This is not just another story about police misconduct. This is a story that cuts to the very heart of why insecurity continues to plague Nigeria despite billions of naira being pumped into security operations year after year. The investigation that led to this tragic end began several weeks ago when intelligence reports started filtering in about a disturbing connection between certain law enforcement officers and the criminal gangs that have been kidnapping students, attacking villages, and holding entire communities hostage in states like Zamfara, Kaduna, Katsina, and Niger. What started as whispers and unconfirmed reports quickly escalated into a full-blown investigation when security operatives intercepted a shipment of sophisticated firearms that were traced back to police armories. The weapons, which included AK-47 rifles and ammunition, were supposed to be used in the fight against banditry, but instead they were finding their ways into the hands of the very criminals the police were meant to be fighting. As the investigation deepened, DSP Adebayo's name kept coming up again and again. Colleagues who had worked with him described him as a quiet officer who kept mostly to himself, but behind that facade, prosecutors believe, was a man who had allegedly been running a lucrative arms supply operation that put profits over the lives of innocent Nigerians. When investigators finally moved to question him formally and possibly make an arrest, they arrived at his home only to discover that he had already made the ultimate escape. The sound of a single gunshot had ended his life and potentially closed the door on crucial information about the full extent of this arms supply network. Now, this brings us to a question that many Nigerians have been asking for years, and it is a question that becomes even more urgent in light of these recent revelations. What about Sheikh Ahmad Gumi? For those who may not be familiar, Sheikh Gumi is a controversial Islamic cleric who has made headlines repeatedly for his meetings with bandit leaders in the forests of northwestern Nigeria. He has positioned himself as a mediator between these criminal groups and the government, arguing that the bandits are victims of circumstance who have been pushed into criminality by poverty and marginalization. He has called for dialogue, amnesty programs, and even suggested that the government should provide education and economic opportunities for these armed groups. On the surface, some might say his intentions appear noble, advocating for peaceful resolution rather than military confrontation. But many Nigerians, including security experts, human rights activists, and families of kidnapping victims, have questioned whether his activities cross the line from mediation into something far more troubling. How does a private citizen have such unfettered access to heavily armed criminal networks that security forces claim they cannot locate? Why do these bandits trust him enough to grant him safe passage into their hideouts? And most importantly, what exactly is being discussed during these meetings that happen away from public scrutiny? Critics have long argued that Sheikh Gumi should face investigation to determine whether his relationship with these bandit groups goes beyond mere dialogue. There are concerns that his activities could potentially be providing cover for these criminals, legitimizing their actions, or even worse, facilitating their operations in ways that are not immediately visible to the public. When a serving Deputy Superintendent of Police is allegedly supplying arms to bandits, it raises serious questions about the entire ecosystem that allows banditry to flourish. If police officers can betray their oath and work with criminals, what prevents others, including religious figures with access and influence, from being part of the problem rather than the solution? If you are finding this discussion eye-opening and you want to stay updated on all the latest developments in Nigerian news, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss any of our videos. The law is quite clear on certain matters. Anyone who provides material support to terrorist organizations or criminal gangs, whether that support comes in the form of weapons, money, intelligence, or even moral legitimacy, can be held accountable under Nigerian law. The Terrorism Prevention Act and various provisions of the Criminal Code make it an offense to aid, abet, or provide support to groups engaged in acts of violence against the state or its citizens. So the question is not whether Sheikh Gumi could be investigated under existing laws. The question is whether there is the political will to do so. Investigating someone like Sheikh Gumi would not be a simple matter, and here's why. First, he has positioned himself as a religious leader, and in Nigeria, religious figures often enjoy a level of protection that comes from their followers and the communities they represent. Any attempt to investigate or prosecute him could be spun as an attack on Islam or an attempt to silence religious voices, even if the investigation is purely about potential criminal activity. Second, there is the question of evidence. While many Nigerians are suspicious of his constant interactions with bandit leaders, suspicion alone is not enough to secure a conviction in court. Prosecutors would need concrete evidence that he has done something illegal. Third, there is the political dimension. Sheikh Gumi has connections within certain political circles, and some politicians have even defended his approach, arguing that dialogue is better than endless military operations. But here's what makes this situation so frustrating for ordinary Nigerians who are suffering under the weight of insecurity. While Sheikh Gumi moves freely, meeting with bandits and advocating for them publicly, families are burying loved ones who were killed in attacks. Students who were kidnapped from their schools are suffering trauma that will last a lifetime. Farmers have abandoned their fields because they cannot work without risking abduction or death. When a DSP can allegedly supply arms to the very bandits causing all this suffering, it tells us that the problem is not just about poverty or marginalization. The problem is that there is a system, a network of enablers and collaborators who benefit from the chaos. So, how would Sheikh Gumi get out of any potential investigation if one were to be launched against him? He could argue that his meetings with bandits are purely humanitarian and religious in nature. He could claim that he is doing the work that the government should be doing. He could present himself as a victim of political persecution. He could also leverage his religious authority and his following to create enough public pressure that any investigation becomes politically untenable. This is the unfortunate reality of how power and influence work in Nigeria. If the Nigerian government is serious about ending banditry and restoring security, then everyone who is part of the problem must be held accountable, regardless of their position or connections. The death of DSP Adebayo should not be the end of this investigation. It should be the beginning of a much deeper probe into how weapons from police armories end up in the hands of bandits. Drop your thoughts in the comments below and share this video with your friends so more people can be informed about what is really happening.